The good news is there are no bad ideas. Why is that good news? Because, well, I can't have a bad idea. The bad news is it doesn't matter. It's not about ideas. This is not about ideas. Ideas are not important in dramatic narratives. That's a mouthful to say and gets me a lot of criticism. I was at a scholarly conference. I was telling you that I rarely go to scholarly conferences. I go to a lot of writers' conferences, but it was at an academic scholarly conference. And someone said at a writing panel, this was out of town, this was up in Montana. He said, you know, the problem with your program at UCLA, I really wanted to hear the rest of this, is that we encourage writers to write screenplays that are, get ready now because I've memorized this, too deeply encoded into the dominant narrative mode. I'll say it again. We encourage writers to write screenplays that are too deeply encoded into the dominant narrative mode. So I thought to myself, what in the world is that? And then I realized narrative is usually what they say when they mean story. I heard myself say to him, because I was very confused, I said, you mean story? And he said, yes, yes. And I said to him, guilty. You're right, that's us. We're story hardliners. We think it's all about story. He said what we should be doing is inculcating into new writers the respect for the value of ideas. Sounds great, doesn't it? But I was saying, well, I'm so sorry, but we think ideas are worthless and useless. Again, it doesn't go over very well, but it's the truth. Any real writer who's a serious writer who has any kind of success will tell you it's not about the idea. And sometimes when they say, oh, I got a great idea, and they really believe that it is a great idea, it's not just an idea. In fact, it's a story that's all worked out. For example, with King's Speech, it's not just a guy who stutters and hires a speech therapist. It's the King of England. It's World War II. You know, but all of this, as we start to describe it, it's no longer just the idea. Now you're telling the story. I'm going to say it again. It's so obvious that it's hard to see. Sometimes things are so obvious you just can't see them. And again, here it is. It's all about story. That's all it's about. It's about telling a good story. Yesterday, on the front page of the New York Times, big article about Philip Roth. There's no more successful writer than Roth. He's 79 and he's announcing that he's stopped writing, at least stopped writing fiction. And I wrote down a quote, again, this is on the front page of Sunday's New York Times. He says, writing is frustration. It's frustration, not to mention humiliation. That's a verbatim quote. I realize I've actually memorized it now. It says Roth. Roth has had 31 books published, 26 novels published. Bunches of them have been made into movies. He's made a great deal of money. He has a beautiful apartment on the Upper West Side. He has a gorgeous home in Connecticut, in the countryside. He's had as much success as any writer has ever had, and he finds it frustrating and humiliating. I mean, that's what art is. It's I've never known any artist who was worth anything who was really, really satisfied with the work that he did. Among the writers who come into our program who want to be successful, a majority of them is 100% a majority. I mean, every one of them wants to be a successful professional, and that's what we want them to be. We are a professional school, and our great success is their success. They're doing fabulously well in all media now. You have to assume it's not going to work out. God is watching. If she sees you take it for granted that it's going to work out, then it's not going to work out. If you need certainty, you shouldn't even start this. If you need to know for sure that you'll succeed at it, you just have to get into the stream and hope for the best. And at the end of the day, let everybody else betray you and shortchange you and let you down. But at least you be true to yourself and keep the writing coming. You got to crank the stuff out. You have to keep the stuff coming. That's the most important part of it. Yeah, I mean, listen, what is a writer trying to do? She's trying to literally trade her daydreams for dollars. Writer, you know, she's trafficking in her own imagination. You know, writers get scolded for what other people get scolded for writers, for what writers get praised for, and that is daydreaming. What could be better than that, you know, to literally live by your wits? So a lot of people are going to compete for it, and it's going to be difficult to succeed at that. But at the end of your life, let everybody else have let you down, but at least you be a warrior for yourself. We do rejoice in an embarrassment of riches here. We do see our students, for the most part, succeed and have successful professional lives. But I like to think that they don't really expect that. They certainly don't take it for granted that that will come to pass. If they do, they will not succeed. Every writer wants to jump over everything always, including myself. I don't consider myself to be a terribly important writer, although I'm a much experienced one. The Wall Street Journal calls me a writer of substantial professional experience. And I have done a lot of work in screen, but not only in screen. I'm also the author of best-selling fiction and nonfiction, and I've also written short films. You know, commercials, corporate propaganda, sales films, instructional, educational films. So I'm hugely experienced, and yet I still want to jump over all of the requirements. But every time I try to do that, I realize I can't. That it just takes time, and you have to give it the time, and that's the most difficult part of it, because after all, time is what your life is made up of. And I mean, time is like the currency of life. If somebody wastes my time, I feel they've killed me a little bit. You know, they've taken part of my life away. And that's what art wants. It wants your life. You better be ready to give your life to this if you want to be a screenwriter. It sounds cynical and dark, but I mean it the opposite way. I can't imagine a more wonderful thing to give a life to than creative expression. Imagine people who do succeed as writers. They're literally swapping their daydreams for dollars. They're trafficking in their own imagination. What could be more wonderful than that? I think it's cause to rejoice, not to despair, but to rejoice. You know, getting your butt into the chair and your hands on the keys, and seeing where it goes. I believe you have to have an outline, but then you got to like throw away that outline. It will take paths that are surprises to the artist that created it. I've never known anybody who ever wrote anything that wasn't surprised, who wasn't surprised by lines of dialogue that the characters seem to invent by themselves, and twists and turns in the story. I remember asking Neil Simon, do you laugh at your own jokes? And he said, sure I do, the first time I hear them. And I think that's fantastic that he actually hears them. It's as if somebody else is telling these jokes to him. And that's the experience, I think, of a lot of artists. It's not, I wrote I sold a Twilight Zone episode years and years ago about a muse. It's sort of a composer of commercial jingles and his muse that proposes, I'll spare you the story. If I told you the story, you'd think, hey, what a good story. But the thesis underneath it was the notion that muses don't desert their artists. It's really the other way around. You have to be available. It's never easy to get into, and you have to own that. You have to know that. I'm not sure that answers what's the first thing you do. Usually something occurs to you that seems kind of odd, you know. Imagine if this happened or that happened. Remember when our first child was going to be born, we went to birth classes, you know, birth preparation classes, which were held at Cedars Sinai, and everybody was supposed to bring a pillow. So suddenly outside, you know, near Beverly Boulevard, near San Vicente, whatever it is. It's like all of these couples, all of the women are quite pregnant, and everybody's carrying pillows. You know, what's that about? Imagine, you know, you're waiting, you drive past a bus stop, and there's like 60 people at the bus stop, and they all have accordions. I don't know, they all got accordions for some reason. What could that be, and how could that, you start to think about that. And also you don't think about it, you just sort of like let it simmer and cook, and maybe a notion will come to you, and that you start to play with it, and see how it unfolds. I know there are other people, including people you're talking to, I'm sure, who have much more precise steps. I reject that in my own work and in the work of the writers that I know. Again, I think that it's a function of surprise, a lot of art is, and the important thing for the artist is to stay open to those surprises rather than try to drag the narrative back to some previous intellectual preconception. My answer to that is yes.
Both, right?
Yeah, you know, they are born, but they are also nurtured. That is to say, they have to. I think nurturing is a big part of it, but it's really a lot about discipline. I think talent is what you're born with. Maybe discipline can be learned to some extent, relative to the way that you're brought up by your parents and the way you're taught by your teachers in the early part of your education. But I would say the most overrated part of the equation is talent. That discipline is really the important part of it. And discipline, here's discipline, here's how you measure discipline, that it's how much time you're willing to put into this. I was talking to a writer the other day who's being told that her script isn't ready. Well, she's rewritten it already 3 times, she said. Well, David Koepp, Koepp, a very, very successful writer who's a former student here. He wrote 2 of the Jurassic Park pictures. He wrote Spider-Man. He's a gigantically successful writer. He says the reason for his success is his ability to get through 17 drafts of a screenplay. So this young woman I was speaking to yesterday doesn't have the discipline. She doesn't want to give it the time that it takes. So it really does take a lot of time, and I think that it's harder to understand that when you're really young, and easier to understand it, conversely, when you're more mature. There is something that I emphasize every day, and it is story. It's all about story. Story is everything else. We were talking earlier, a moment ago, about dialogue. I also said something about character. Well, what is dialogue? What is character? It's you know, the stuff that the protagonist or the other characters in the movie speak, and it's what they do and what they say. It's the story. The richest, the densest, the most analyzed and studied character in all of certainly English language dramatic literature and arguably world dramatic literature is Hamlet. Certainly he's a candidate for the #1 studied character. Was he crazy, or does he feign madness as part of his scheme to bring justice to his late father and his father's memory? There are so many questions that are asked about Hamlet, so many books written about his character. What is the playwright's description of Hamlet in the play? It's 3 words: Prince of Denmark. That's all Shakespeare tells us about Hamlet. So there's nothing about melancholy, for example. Not in the description of the character, nor anywhere in the play does that word appear. So where does this Hamlet guy come from? And the answer is what he does and what he says. That's what makes up a character. And again, to create a character like that takes a bunch of time because it's a story. It's really part of the story. These things don't break apart into separate, discrete entities, but rather have functions together only when they are linked as functions of one another. There's a wonderful book, very underappreciated, by a writer who died a few years ago. It's called Plots and Characters. And by the way, plots is first, not by accident. And also in Aristotle's Poetics, the first book on dramatic writing, he clearly says plot is what's really important, not character, because again, character flows out of plot. There isn't any character outside of a plot. And if there's a plot, there's automatically characters that are going to be in it. Once again, I just can't hammer enough on how amateurs, dilettantes don't get that it's really about story, and that the real work of a writer is inventing the actions. Millard Kaufman is the name of the writer who wrote the book Plots and Characters. And he has one of the most timeless, brilliant lines in it that I've ever heard. And here it is, I've already said it, which is that it is action that defines character and not the other way around. I'm going to say it again. It's action that defines character and not the other way around. People who think it's the other way around are the kind of people who are doing these character workshops. We'll invent a character who has all of these traits and qualities and characteristics, and then we'll turn her loose and see what she does. No. Define what she does. Tell us, what does she do, and that'll tell us who she is. That's true in your dramatic narrative that you write for the screen. It's also true in your life, isn't it? I mean, I like to think that I'm a moral, principled, reliable, decent person, but I look back at what I've done in my life and I see shortchanging myself and others, disappointing myself and others, constantly, frequently acting out of fear. I would say my actions define me as a little bit of a coward. I'm afraid of a lot of things. It's not the way I want to be, but again, it's what I do. It's the actions, the events, the incidents, the anecdotes in my life that tell me who I am, and that tell anybody who they are, and that tell audiences in movies, in movie theaters, looking at the screen. That's what tells them who those characters are. Tony Soprano is a function of what he does. He's a vicious murderer, criminal. He's also a father and a husband. He's also a troubled man who's having blackouts, fainting spells, and he's worried. Is so worried that he does a really wimpish thing, which engages a psychiatrist, a therapist, a woman on top of that. A mobster, a made man, and the mob doesn't do that. And all of those things define for us who he is. Again, it's not like we've defined the character and then put him into the situations. We put him into the situations and then the situations define the character. Sometimes people say to me, yeah, but Richie, novels are longer than a screenplay. My last novel, and I don't mind bragging, it made the Times bestseller list. Okay, just number 13 and only for a week, but that's not a small thing, the Times list. That was about 236 pages or 245 pages, something like that, in TypeScript. I'm sorry, the published book. So in TypeScript it was about 300 pages. Now a screenplay should not be much more than 100 pages. The screenplays are getting shorter now, which I think is good. The last job that I did, I had an assignment this past year, and that script came out, I think, at 93, 94 pages. And it's full, it's complete. And my point is, and the reason I'm dwelling on these page counts is it's easier to write a longer thing than a shorter thing. And it would seem counterintuitive, but think about it. There's a famous letter that Ernest Hemingway wrote. He was in Cuba, living in Cuba, and I believe he was writing The Old Man and the Sea, one of his later books, a wonderful book. Of course, everything he did was wonderful. And in the midst of working on the book, he wrote a long letter, it was 9 pages long, to Maxwell Perkins, the legendary editor, who worked with a lot of famous writers, including Hemingway. And he was discussing various aspects of the book and whatever. And at the end of the letter, he says, well, that's about it for now, Max. Please forgive me for writing such a long letter. I didn't have the time to write a short one. It takes more time to do what artists have to do, which is to cull and select and throw away. So much screenwriting education is about structure and construction and building up. And I think there is some useful time spent considering that. But ultimately, creating dramatic narratives is not about building up. I think it's about tearing down and taking away. It's about discovery, taking the cover off and finding something that's already there. I never knew a writer. I have a lot of experience myself as a writer, but that experience is leveraged exponentially by all the writers I've worked with very intimately, very closely over, now for 35 years, here on campus with writers in our advanced graduate screenwriting classes, but also in the community. I am a script doctor. I'm a pretty busy script doctor. I give notes to lots of writers. No small number of those writers have deals at studios. They're coming to me and saying, ask me the hard questions before the producer asks them. Becoming more and more routine, I think, in Hollywood, even when you have a deal, to consult with somebody before you actually submit it to the studio. And so having done that has expanded my own experience, as I say, exponentially. And I've never known a writer, I've never met a writer who wasn't surprised by things that happened in her story, by lines of dialogue that a particular character suddenly spoke. It's as if it kind of has a life of its own. I have had some modest success in my career, not just in film, working and making a living as a screenwriter, but also publishing with major publishers, for the most part, actually in my case, all New York publishers. The publishing business still is mainly New York, just like Hollywood is still Hollywood. And on several occasions, I took something that I had written as a film, and in some instances, I'd actually had options, made some money on it, but had never really ever gotten it to where I wanted it to be. That is to say, a deal, that got made into something that audiences could participate. And what I did was use the novel, use the screenplay as an elaborate outline for a novel. No writing is easy, but it's easier once all the heavy lifting has been done. Once you've written a screenplay, you know who the characters are, you know almost all of the dialogue, certainly a lot of the dialogue, most of the dialogue. The story is all worked out. You now have merely to write it. Now, I pause on merely because there's nothing mere about writing, but it is easier to just put the words on once you have all of the incidents and the events and the anecdotal stuff worked out, and then it becomes a question of description. I have had success at that. That is to say, couldn't make the movie happen, so wrote it as a novel, and then sold the novel as a novel, was able to get the novel published, and then suddenly there was interest in it as a novel. That is to say, an adapted novel, adapted for the screen. My current gripe with Hollywood, with the American film industry, is the refusal to do original stuff. Well, you can take an original screenplay and turn it into a novel, and then it's no longer original. Now it's an adaptation, and that's what they prefer to do. So you can kind of, in a sort of a Zen surrender sort of a way, make it what they want it to be. I also will tell you that I find greater satisfaction in writing novels. They're easier. They're not easy, but they're easier. They are more tolerant of inefficiency and bad economy. I'm not saying you should be inefficient and uneconomical. And when I talk about economical, I mean in terms of moving story freight, moving character freight with a little bit of language rather than the other way around. And you'll really get killed in a movie, in a screenplay, if it's inefficient. But a novel, I think, because the viewer, the reader of the novel, has the opportunity to turn the pages faster, or even to skip over stuff, or conversely to go back and review stuff, makes it somewhat easier for the writer to write it down. It's funny, at my class, the class which meets tonight, in the first class, I always brag about all of the scripts that got written in the class that became movies. Now, most of the people who succeed don't sell the scripts that they write in the class, much less have them made into movies. They use them as showcases. They win representation, they win development deals and rewrite assignments and other kinds of rewards. But there are some that have actually been written right in the classes that became movies. And I brag to the 8 writers around the table about those. First thing I do. The next thing I do is I tell them, now, please don't try to sell the scripts that you write in this class. And then I take a long silence. And I let people think about what seems like a contradiction. I've just been bragging about all the scripts that have sold out of the class, and here I am saying, please don't try to sell the scripts that you read in the class. And I point out to the student that you write in the class. And then I point out to the writers that it's not a contradiction. I didn't say don't sell the scripts that you write in the class. I said don't try to sell the scripts that you write in the class. If you're thinking about the sale while you're working on it, you are doomed. You are lost. You're intellectualizing, you're calculating, you're getting into all kinds of processes that will militate against successful art. You're getting, again, too intellectual, too into your head when you think that way. You start to think about trends, what's popular, who might this be right for. I once had a writer who'd been admitted to the program. It's extremely unusual that somebody's admitted and doesn't enter the program. Our so-called take rate, the percentage of people who are admitted who actually enroll, is like 99%. But there was one guy who came to me with a ruled yellow legal pad. He'd been admitted, he wasn't sure he wanted to come, and he wanted to know the percentage of students that had agents after how much time, with a median income for graduates at the 5-year mark, the 10-year mark. Not only the median, but the mean and also the average. I resisted telling them the mean and the average are the same. The median is different, but the mean and the average, those are 2 synonyms. And I said to him, I said, I could get all of those statistics for you that would show you, that this is the best way to succeed in the movie business, to become a writer, is to come to this program. I said, but I'm not going to do that. For 2 reasons. The second reason is I'm the professor. I give the assignments. I don't do the assignment. I mean, he's giving me all these assignments, and hey, I got tenure. I dish it out. I don't take it anymore. But first of all, I said to him, I don't think you will succeed. And I hope I didn't say this cruelly. I said it truthfully. I said, I do not believe that you will succeed if you come through this program. If you enter this program, we've admitted you. We will welcome you warmly, and we will treat you generously, but I don't think you're going to succeed. And he said, why do you think? I said, because you're sitting here asking me with a ruled yellow legal pad, asking me about the median and the mean and the average and the deb and who has the agent and what about story and character and dialogue and stuff like that. Themes, lessons, the sorts of things that come out of art. You're already focusing on the future and how things are going to stack up. They're probably not going to stack up, and I was serious. This was not reverse psychology trying to convince them to come. Whenever anybody, there's 2 kinds of questions I never answer. One is, should I pursue this? The answer is no. If you have to ask, then you shouldn't do this. It's too frustrating. Again, Philip Roth, yesterday's New York Times, writing is frustration. It's frustration, not to mention humiliation. Quote, close quote. Roth, this isn't some newcomer trying to make his way through the publishing business. This is the superstar author of the 31 books. Bestseller after bestseller after bestseller after bestseller. Movie deals up the wazoo. And he says it's frustration and humiliation. Don't go into it if there's something else that you can do. It's kind of crazy. It's not smart. I mean, I mentioned that my dad was a bass player. He had great success, made a lot of money. And what was he doing? He was dragging horsehair, which is what the bow is made out of. It's the tail of a horse, a violin bow or a bass bow, across sheep gut. The strings are made out of the intestines of sheep. And imagine doing that for a living, dragging horsehair across sheep gut so that it makes a sound, and then claiming that you think people will pay to hear this sound. They'll line up in the snow and wait outside for hours to pay big money to sit in a chamber where for a couple of hours women and men will do that. Will, blow air through tubes like flutes and clarinets and so on. And I mean, I mentioned we were at the Philharmonic on Saturday. There's a guy beating the timpani, and somebody doing bells. This is like, we had so-so seats, so they would cost $230 the pair, I mean, it's crazy. Art's not smart. It's kind of dumb. And if you're really, really smart, you don't go into it. This is not for really, really smart people. You got to be dumber than that if you want to succeed in creative expression. You got to be a little crazy.